Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce a special evening organized by ARTNOIR called Critical Soundboarding, an intimate conversation between the artists Elia Alba, Firelei Báez, and Fariha Woolfalk, moderated by independent curator and the co-founder of ARTNOIR, Larry Ossei-Mensah. In this dialogue, Elia, Firelei, and Fariha will discuss their individual practices and how their educations and relationships with other artists and each other have shaped their work and propelled it forward. Elia Alba interrogates boundaries and categorizations of race, gender, history, and culture, and it challenges perceptions of their fixedness to present new interpretations and new narratives. Elia's work's been shown at El Museo del Barrio, the Rhode Island School of Design, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and the Reina Sofia in Madrid, and also at the 10th Havana Biennial. She graduated from Hunter College and completed the Whitney Museum's independent study program. Firelei Báez was born in the Dominican Republic and she's interested in race, anthropology, science fiction, and Black subjectivity. Firelei uses her work to interrogate diasporic identity formation. Her work's been exhibited in group shows at the Perez Art Museum in Miami, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art in Atlanta. She recently had a solo show at the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She studied at Cooper Union and Skowhegan and received an MFA from Hunter College. Fariha Woolfalk is inspired by science fiction. She uses painting, video, sculpture, performance, and installation to offer rich new worlds replete with fantastic figures. Through her work, she highlights cultural hybridity and offers a unique critique. She offers a critique of present society while creating a surreal utopia. Her work has been shown at MoMA PS1, the Brooklyn Museum of Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, Performa 9, the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk, Virginia, and at the Montclair Art Museum in nearby New Jersey. Fariha studied at Brown University for undergraduate and received an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And last but not least, Larry's organization, ARTNOIR. They are a global collective of culturalists who design experiences aimed to engage this generation's dynamic and diverse creative communities. They offer an alternative perspective to the traditional arts narrative, supporting the freedom of artistic expression for all and providing a platform for bold acts of creativity and storytelling. Please join me in welcoming Larry Ossei-Mensah, Elia Alba, Firelei Báez, and Fariha Woolfalk.
I've been a practicing artist since 1999, so there's a lot of stuff I could have shown and crammed in 5 minutes. But I decided to keep it to my most recent body of work called The Supper Club. You may or may not be familiar with it. It's a project that I started in 2012, where I wanted to collaborate with my fellow artists to create portraits of them, in other words, that exemplified who I thought they were, or a better way to say it is like making them an embodiment of their practice. And I wanted to do that initially, at the very beginning, was a response to the Vanity Fair edition, the Hollywood edition in particular, and to media and magazines in general. I just wanted to do like a presentation of folks of color in these fantastical type of portraits. So I'm actually going to show you, because both Firelei and Fariha Woolfalk are part of this project. Most of the artists that I did photograph, I wound up photographing about 60 artists. Some fantasy, some not. It all depended on how much the artist wanted to let me go to town with them. These two ladies let me go to town. So the first one that I'm showing you here is Fariha Woolfalk. And so one of the other things too with these portraits is that aside from looking at their practice and making them an embodiment of their practice, I put a moniker to them. So if you're familiar with this Vanity Fair issue or any of the music issue, they assign certain monikers to identify that artist or that celebrity in the group. So Fariha Woolfalk is, drum roll please, the myth maker. I mean, it just felt right if you're familiar with Saya's practice. I'm not going to talk too much about it because she's going to give you an explanation about it. But Saya does deal with mythology and recreating new histories and creating, with the empathics, a new, one would say, a new race, so we can think about race itself. And so that for me was something that I wanted to think about with the work, making her into kind of like her own mythic being. And so a lot of the times when I photograph an artist, I look to certain influences. I definitely was looking at Afrofuturism. I was looking at the 70s when I was thinking of Saya. And, I think the birth of Afrofuturism was at that time. So this is a total riff off of a funk band called Aquarian Dream. This is actually one of their album covers from 1971 called Fantasy. And so we went to Saya's studio and we built all this up with live plants, paper flowers, paper lions, and created this kind of, like I said, some kind of hybrid being, but nonetheless a very female persona. So I feel like she's Japanese, where is she from? Is she Japanese? Is she Egyptian? And so that's another thing that I always like to bring into most of my practice, is kind of ambiguity in the people or the person that I'm photographing. So this is Saya the Mythmaker. Now moving on to Firelei Báez. I have to say this. She's called the storyteller. Actually, she could have been the myth maker as well, because I think they both in their work deal with reinterpreting and re-envisioning mythologies. But we couldn't have two myth makers. So she was a storyteller. And a lot of it has to do, because I think Firelei deals with a lot of narratives between her own culture, which is double. She's part Dominican, part Haitian, but she's also a black woman in the United States. So she merges these kinds of narratives and stories to create, again, either different beings or different ways of looking at the world. So we were not going to fashion her after Storm. This is a little fun fact. Firelei told me 4 days before the shoot that she had dyed her hair blue. And so we had to scramble, and luckily I was working with a really great hairstylist, and we managed to do this. Now, why Storm? I mean, once she said blue, I almost feel like there was a certain, it's one of those things when you're taking pictures, it's a mistake, but it's a great mistake, because I think this picture surpasses so much more than what I wanted to do. And it was just because Firelei dyed her hair blue, and I think that thank you. And another fun fact about this that I just found out today through Firelei, that Storm is actually the wife of Black Panther in Marvel Comics. She was also a biracial woman. Her father was white, an American, and the mother was an African priestess. And who knows what's going to go on in the next Black Panther story. Hopefully Storm will come up. Okay, so I've talked already too much, so I'm just going to leave it with this last image here is of Maren Hassinger. She's the dancer. A lot of her work deals with spirituality and nature, and she loves a lot of pink and purple in some of her performances, especially in her older work. I'm just going to quickly go through these. This is Simone Lee. She's the Earthseed. A lot of it has to do with Octavia Butler's Earths, if you're familiar with Octavia Butler, and the Bible within that book is called the Earthseed. I wish I could talk more, but I'm running out of time. This is Legacy Russell. She's the glitch feminist. who's actually coming here, I heard, next month to talk. And this is Lorraine O'Grady, which I'm sure most of you know. She's the trailblazer. Also with these portraits, I started to do these like dinners. When I started to do this project, I was gonna, it was always gonna be a book. There is gonna be a book at the end of this year with the portraits. And I started to think about, well, how can I contextualize these artists, not just through their image, but through their words and how they feel and think about, you know, being an artist, agency, audience. So I created this thing, these dinners. We started to do these dinners. I felt it would be very interesting to have all these artists in conversation with one another to accompany the photographs. Well, what turned out to be a 3-dinner project has been now up to 30, and it's included many, I think over 500 people now, and it's become its kind of like own project. And I think we've moved a little bit beyond agency, although agency always filters in, but we talk a lot about social political issues, and I invite, now it's just, you know, people outside of the 60 that I initially started to photograph. So this was the very first dinner that I did. We started doing them in restaurants, and now I cook. I cook for like about 20 to 25 people, and I get hosts to come in and talk about particular themes. Like one dinner was about Pulse Orlando. The last dinner we did on gentrification. We did a dinner on Black male subjectivity, which was actually quite beautiful. We did 2 on Black female subjectivity, one about radical consciousness of women, the other one with Simone Lee hosting, having to do a lot with her Black women artists for Black Lives Matter. I've also gone to DC. This is it's the fanciest dinner I've ever done. It was in the home of a collector, but it actually opened the door to a lot of you know, people in the DC area. So that's like my next step right now, to kind of take these dinners nationally and kind of expand this archive of people, or people of color in conversation. And I always look not necessarily for just, you know, I want the conversations to move beyond just a black and white discussion. So a lot, when I say people of color, I mean like African Americans, Latin Americans, Latinx, South Asians, Asians, etc. Anyway, I could go on, but I won't because it's time. Thank you.
We'll be showing slides not individually. I'll just be talking generally about my practice. I tend to mine the archive like both Saya and Elia do, and there's always this thin line between what is a fact and what is an invention, because I feel that to tell a bigger truth, you have to expand on what's been handed down. And so many times I'll reference personal folklore, and I try to recontextualize the Caribbean, and specifically the island I was born in a global context. So one thing I always mention, especially growing up in the States, is how many of the things that we take for granted as Americana are intrinsically indebted to movements and ideas, not just the bodies of the Caribbean. And you know, how there might be sometimes parallels in how we perceive the self and the body in both, but there's always that dissonance of how ideas around language in both Romance and Anglophone language can really embed how we think of ourselves. And so I explore those ideas around language and around the body and around landscape and how they determine how we treat both. So that was, for instance, a series of self-portraits I did for 2 years, where I referenced the fan test in the Caribbean and the brown paperback test in the United States, both of which were meant to be gauges of beauty, of how we determine whiteness or passing as white in these countries. And then after some time, I felt that seeing myself through those 2 parameters was inherently violent. There's a psychological violence that goes with seeing yourself through that. So I went back and through every journal made a portrait based on my notes. So more of an internal, using color as a internal psychology rather than external cultural imposition. And so I won't go into specifics for the other ones. These are, you're going to see some installation shots of works that were at the Perez Museum and Utah. So they're fairly recent. So it's mostly work within the last like 4 years or so. That if you see, it's not, I like to go into an image based on what I'm interested in at the moment. It's never going to be, so like if I have a conversation or I happen to read an article, that'll then draw me to make something else. And so nothing tends to look the same. I usually try to have the interest drive what the image will be. So they usually, for me, form then a conversation between them because they're all tied together to the same ideas that I mentioned before of putting myself and the spaces I grew up in this global context and showing how, there's all this intertwining in between. I can't wait to hear feedback. There's actually a poem by José Martí. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of him. He's a poet and was a revolutionary in many Latin American countries, but he has these, I grew up in Miami, and there was this placard for Hialeah, I believe, where they say, Las palmas son novias que esperan, and it doesn't translate all that well, but it kind of determines how we see landscape. Palm trees are waiting brides. So this idea that the landscape is this passive thing waiting to be activated by the lover. And so I have all these women creatures that are coming from the landscape that are kind of hellions, and they're untraceable because their legs are backward, and they do and undo, they don't wait. So you'll see, I want to bring agency to bodies that have been considered and consumed as otherwise. When we think of the Caribbean, we think Caribbean cruise lines or bodies and consumption, things and spaces that are there for our pleasure that have no context. So the drive in my work is to make that context evident. And sometimes I'll do that by looking at these, literally tearing apart archives. So libraries deaccession books, and they, when they're trying to clean out not just the physical space, but the conceptual spaces, ideas that might not be on trend, and they want to disavow. So what I do is that I introduce the very same bodies I was speaking of, so that they enact onto those pages, and they're shown open. So when the viewer comes forward, their breath is trapped on the page, and that, whether they want to or not, they're helping me destroy that history. We're destroying it together. And you'll recognize some figures in there. As you can see, I took some from the library, Cooper being one of them. I had my how would you say, librarian enablers. And so my work is mostly painting on paper and gouache and all these different materials, but I went to a school that encouraged me to not focus on one specific thing. So I would do a lot of sculpture, a lot of photo, a lot of everything that could be done, but I tend to try to tailor the conversation. I think both Teresita and Adrian Piper have mentioned how you can have all this play in your studio, but what you choose to show is up to you. So I've chosen to show paintings so far, and I'm showing more installations. And I'll sit down for now, but you can see some other images as they display.
So my work, it deals thematically a lot with the things that both Elia and Firelei have mentioned. I'm Black, white, and Japanese, so I'm really interested in hybridity. And I spent a lot of my kind of young adulthood here in the United States and childhood in the United States. I was born in Japan, but I grew up in the States, really not seeing a lot of representational systems that actually dealt with this kind of state of the confluence of cultures that I actually grew up within. And so I didn't want my practice to become about personal storytelling when I started working. I didn't want it to be about my specific family. And so what I started working on was looking at folkloric performance traditions that create moments of resistance and tell larger social stories. And I had a Fulbright for 2 years in northeastern Brazil in a place called Alcântara Maranhão. And I think that was what really transformed my practice and allowed me to kind of build this fantastical world that I've been building for basically about 15 years. The first project was called No Place. I unfortunately didn't include images of that project in this slide presentation. And it was an ethnographic film that I worked on with an anthropologist where we mined the stories of utopia, of the people in our community, and then constructed an ethnographic film called The Ethnography of No Place, based on the stories of the people who came to the studio. So from that, and that was actually a kind of utopian project, emerged the empathics. And the empathics are people in the present who want this utopian world to come into existence. And so they find bones in the woods of upstate New York, and those bones stimulate mutation in their morphology. So not only does it change them physically, but it changes them socially. And so I use science fiction as a kind of way to talk about race and talk about alternative states of being. And this first installation that you're seeing is called Herniated Consciousness. And it was kind of a play on this idea of double consciousness, because the first physical manifestation of becoming an empathic is to develop a second head. So once these empathics develop two heads, which has two conflicting sets of genetic information, they begin to have these creolizing visions. The creolizing visions are stimulated through a process called utopia conjuring therapy, which is a collective process that people opt into, and then they make visionary paintings. This is an empathic having one of her visionary dreams or lucid dreams. And this is one of the visionary paintings. It's called Pages from the Book, Empathetic Plant Alchemy. And so what I did was I collected kind of material from disparate sources, and then I combined the material from disparate sources and fused them into these images. And the idea is that the empathics basically have this kind of state of duality or multiplicity, and it's through this process of lucid dreaming that they're able to take that state of multiplicity and fuse it into something that can be distributed to other people. They have a utopia conjuring chamber, and after they go through this process of utopia conjuring therapy, this is a reconstruction of their Institute of Empathy, they shed their second heads and they molt their skins, and then they embellish their sheds and their hides and sell them to perpetuate the research at their institute. So there's this kind of entrance into capitalism, right? So they recognize the imperative to enter into the society that they actually exist in and the structures that they actually function within. This is an aerial display. It's also in one of the pages from the book, Empathetic Plant Alchemy. And so once they shed their second heads, they enact what they see in their visions collectively. And this is one of those enactments. This is an installation called Chimera, and an installation at the Brooklyn Museum for the Sackler Center, where the empathics go and download Judy Chicago's dinner party plates into their operating system. So once they kind of establish the Institute of Empathy, the empathics decide that it is time to start a corporation. And they want to start a technology corporation. And their technology corporation requires information to be collected into their operating system. They have a beta launch for their life product system at Smack Mellon Gallery, and we led meditation sessions where people were introduced to the life product system in the installation. They also give people the opportunity to wipe their identities clean and download customized identity algorithms. These two collages are animated, and so there's kind of two parts to this. They're animated and placed on the avatar download station, which you see on the left. But before a user can use the avatar download station, they use the hybridization machine, which wipes their identity clean with a virtual DJ who is able to do that, basically filling your mind with color and sound. This is an installation called Virtual Chimeric Space, in which the empathics introduce people to the virtual world that has been accumulated through the collection of all of the identities that they've accumulated through the process of people wiping their identities clean. And a performance where Chimatech operators bring crystals from the cloud, so they're objects from the cloud that have been uploaded into this kind of virtual space, and physicalized through an augmented reality application. So people would come to this performance piece, see the dancers perform, and the dancers choreograph their entire piece in response to this virtual object. These are elements from the cloud presented as an empathic imaginary in Times Square. And cloud skins. So this is kind of where I am right now, which is to take elements from the cloud, export them back into the real world, and then invite people to actually experience these new bodies and basically reskin their bodies. And I've done this already a bit in virtual reality, but not in actual physical reality. So they might experience what it looks like to actually basically come out of the cloud and become these other beings. That's the end of my presentation.
I would be interested in doing a bit of a deeper dive with regard to the themes that you mentioned. So we talked about, the body, the fantastical, botanicals, science fiction, cultural hybridity, language, world building. Can you talk a little bit more about why these various themes have been like foundational components to your practice, one? And then two, when you first saw each other's work and you began to see that there were correlations in the practice, how did that inspire how you approach your practice? What were those conversations like, etc.?
I don't know if we ever sat down and had like a conversation, but when you feel that you're kind of operating on the same plane, there is like some kind of connection. And the conversations, I remember for me, didn't necessarily deal specifically with the work, but how we viewed and interacted in the world and what that meant. Like you talked about being Japanese Black, right? You are from the Dominican Republic and you're Dominican and Haitian. And I was born here, but I never, and I think I said this to you, I never felt like I totally belonged here because my identity of an American is constantly questioned all the time because I don't fit the script. So I think it's our relationship to the world, I think, that brought us together. And I think that's where a lot of the work comes from.
I agree. It's completely experience first. We're dealing with so many similar things. And with Zaya and I being born, the idea of being born somewhere and not belonging in this bridge space in between, we're constantly functioning on how to, on fleshing out that in between space. And, paintings existed, photography, like visual imagery has existed since forever, but seeing the threads of overlap is what probably draws us to each other's work all the time, and what makes people curate us into shows together all the time. We're like, oh, I see, you're completely different experiences, but this is emerging out of the work.
So yeah, I mean, I basically was going to cover similar ground. I think it is actually a lot in social interactions, and when I started making work professionally in 2004, I want to say, and that's not that long ago, but it is long ago enough for me to remember the fact that when I entered into the art world, this was not, this was not a normal conversation. Um, and so I remember very explicitly looking for artists, like Firelei or Elia, who actually made work or thought about the world the way that, I was thinking about the world, which wasn't something that, you just could find easily by going to a museum or a gallery. And so I think that's how kind of cohorts get built, right? So one of the first times I mean, Will Villolongo could have been a really great person on this panel too, In 2005, I was introduced to his work at the Greater New York Show when I was showing a piece at PS1 MoMA, and it was through the Friends of Education. And I think, I kind of gravitated towards his practice immediately, in part because I was like, oh my gosh, there's someone, because I remember actually people's responses to my installations was like, what is this? Like, what is this? Like, what is this crazy thing? This makes no sense at all.
That makes it also exciting because you're at this space where you can bring something new to the table. Obviously, it's existed forever at the same time, but but being able to voice it, give it a space, is something that it feels good to do, but it's not always easy.
Well, I don't think we have a choice.
Yeah,
right.
There's no
choice.
There is no choice.
There's no choice.
When people like Villolongo started to come out, and Firelei and Saya, I naturally gravitated towards them. But I do remember it being a very difficult time in the 90s when it was, we were coming out of multiculturalism, and that was just like a big, you know, it was all piled up. You don't talk about identity and representation, and what a person like myself meant in the world. Well, that was already taken care of with multiculturalism. What are you talking about? And that really shut the door a lot with curators, with institutions, except in Museo del Barrio, and even that wasn't right away. So for me, it was exciting beyond belief to finally see um, younger people being preoccupied with the things that I have been preoccupied for some time. And so, yeah, I mean, that's.
Elia was one of the first artists to foster, to be like, I see what you're doing. Let's go hang out. Let's talk about our work. I have this series, the creatures, the poem, the half nature, half fauna. Um, they're based on this Dominican folklore of the Ciguapa, and she was taught to me as a kid as a warning of what not to be, like this wild femininity of what not to be. And I always thought, like, she's a badass. She's untraceable because their feet are backwards. And she gets to basically break generations of karmic load. So Elia had her own Ciguapa series. And we talked about our own, like, how we, through our experiences, had interpreted that thing we grew up with differently and where they overlap. So, yeah, she'd already been doing it. And I just, like, we then can collaborate and make something new.
Pictures. I know in those pictures, I mean, what's so awesome about your pictures, Elia, is exactly that, is that it tracks a cohort. I mean, Nicole Y is here, and Lina Puerta's here, and, it tracks a cohort. I mean, it's a group of artists who have very, very distinct practices. Hank Willis Thomas is in it, Micheline Thomas is in it. I mean, it's this incredibly diverse group of people, but we all kind of came out thinking about things in very different ways, but addressing the kind of complexity of identity, and so it's a fantastic, I mean, I love your project, I feel like.
Supper Club was going to be just pictures and those 3 dinners because I wanted a book. I wanted to document this group of artists. It was 50 because I was approaching 50, so I wanted to be 50. It's 60 now, and there's still more because I'm asking. I don't feel I'm done yet. There's so many people that I've met through the process of documenting these artists, that I feel that there's just more I want to document. But back to the original group. So it was 50, and then the dinners, as I said, came about because I wanted to give them a voice, but not necessarily have them interviewing them and stuff like that. So, I mean, if I had a moniker, I'd consider myself an anthropologist because I felt like, I mean, each portrait that I took wasn't just like, well, let me just take your picture. I mean, I think I asked you in 2012, and we photographed in 2014. Same thing. You were like 3 years later. No, I don't think it was just you. I think it was okay. Yes, I know Saya. Yes, I know Firelei, but I needed to think about what that meant and think about how I wanted to portray them and how that was. Hopefully, that they were happy with it too. So there is a level of research in that involved in getting a portrait done. So if I've told a few people already I want to photograph them, and they're like, we're ready, and I'm like, dude, you got to give me like a year or two because I feel like it takes that long for me. I need to hang out with you more. I try to put a little bit of the psychology of the person in the picture. So I like to hang out a little. We started to hang out, dinner, or go to your studio, talk on the phone, and have that interaction before I get to the picture. And then if you come to dinners, I've heard, that too helps in the creation of the portrait. And then the dinners themselves now are, I'm applying to a few grants to just then now take the dinners um, out of New York. I'm interested to see how these discussions translate in like more regional spaces.
Can I
or
have a
local
quick
spaces.
Kanye moment?
Yes.
So she,
I love
the
you.
power, how she crystallizes the. Sometimes people don't even know who they are until Elia's like, "You're this." So Latoya Frazier, she transformed. Like she's like, "You're this. This is who you are." And she's like, "No, no, I'm not comfortable in that space," and that's who she is, fully embodied now. But it took Elia being like, "Trust my voice." And that's who she became. No, no, no. She, yeah. Who Latoya presents herself as was not who she presented herself as.
Well, and I was going to
Before
say
Elia.
something similar, related, which is that I would argue that the Supper Club is a world building project. I mean, I would argue that it's not in fiction, it's in reality. So basically, what you're doing is you're, bringing together a cohort and you're building a community through conversations and you're building a world. So it's a really powerful, like part fiction, part reality project.
And the thing is, and I think these intersectional conversations are becoming more and more important and more relevant. Like this black and white dynamic doesn't really work anymore. I don't think. I don't think you can really, because the country is shifting. It's probably been shifting for a long time. We're just not coming to terms with that. Um, Black means many things, and that has to be part of the conversation. And that was like a big impetus too to keep them going because the first dinner that we had, I remember two artists. Can I say this, Nicole? Because I know you're hearing this. we The first dinner was so intense because I'm like, oh, la da da, we're going to talk about agency, we're going to talk about audience, and we're all going to be happy and whatever. But it wasn't like that. There was a lot of divide. Firelei, you were at that dinner. There was a lot of divide at that table. Um, you know, I remember Nicole saying, I'm tired of being the good black. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? And then Simone Lee said, well, I'm not going to identify Jamaican because that diminishes like African Americans. the idea that she talked about how um, there is almost like it's too much privilege to say you're anything other than, and that was she. I mean, she was like upset when she was saying it, as Nicole was saying, I don't want to be the girl, like that side eye. Look at the side eye up there. And then you had the Latin American people like feeling that they're not acknowledged at all, and then you had some people saying you're acknowledged too much. You have the privilege of being lighter skinned, because the whole colorism conversation came into into that dinner. I mean, there was a lot of layers in that conversation, in that dinner, that I really felt I can't stop this right now, and I can't stop it at three dinners. I need to know why people are feeling this way. And then now it's like, well, I want people to come together and understand, because we talk a lot about how different we are all the time. There's like books written about it, historians write about this identity and that identity. I'm waiting for the historian to kind of synthesize, which is what we're doing in our practice, synthesize these histories and understand more of those commonalities and those differences, which is, the blurring of boundaries lingo that I have there.
That's one of the benefits of being an artist. You don't have to explain everything like an academic has. There's all these methodologies you can skip over. Like you have access to the information, you can process it quickly and you know make disseminate it. But historians have to be approved before they can even start exploring, and then there's all this stuff. And because they have to go through so many processes, they're given more room at the table. They're like, oh, your voice is more valid because you've gone through all this. But we're catching up. I have to say that it probably growing up in an Anglophone space made me hyper aware, and it made me name it more quickly than if I had grown up in DR completely. I had my formative years there, but if I had had all my formal schooling there, I would have other conversations around it. There would be a circumventing around the issue, and growing up in the United States, you're either or. The Anglophone churches made sure to separate the spirit, and like it all, breaks down from there.
Yeah, I also I actually grew up in a very white environment. I grew up in Scarsdale, New York, and I think I also, I was just hyper aware of the fact that I was not like everybody else, right? And the the reality for me is that I'm really excited about it now as an artist, because I'm constantly trying to put my work in as many non so because I identify that way, because I've lived my entire life kind of as a hybrid, I'm constantly attempting to resist the categorization that people attempt to apply to the work. And so I am constantly actually intentionally, so it's become this kind of intentional practice of undermining people's expectations of where the work should live. And I think that's part of, you know, it may or may not be something that is strategically a fantastic thing to do, right? In the United States, it is much more strategic to live in a unified space. Like, okay, put yourself in this category and consistently function within that category, and you will move forward or you will not move forward within that category. But I'm constantly trying to be in shows about art and contemporary technology and African American exhibitions and Asian American exhibitions and just white American exhibitions, and I'm really invested in what happens when the work can't. Not only can the subject not be categorized, but when the work actually can't be categorized. And so that's also why I'm constantly shifting media, right? Is that the the there is no unification of media. There is a kind of unification of aesthetic in my work, I think, but like because it's constantly shifting and changing, you actually can't really know what it's going to be in the next iteration. And I think, anyone who's making really interesting art to me is making work where you look at the thing and you don't know where you are. And you're trying to figure out where you are. Like, you're trying to figure it out. Like, you're like, I don't know where I am. I think I know where I am, but I don't really know where I am.
You assume you're in that space and suddenly everything
What breaks down around you. And so that's, I not only do it in my practice, but I try to do it in how my practice works.
Initially, the first three dinners, well, they weren't organic. We got performance artist Wanda Ortiz come as her character Chuleta, which is an abrasive. She predates Hennessy Youngman, okay? Look her up. Anyway, so she came in there all ghetto talking about art. Some people didn't like that. And so it was 2012. But now I do send prompts. I work with hosts, and so we'll send like a prompt. I kind of put the big overreaching theme, and then the host kind of narrow it down. So, for instance, we did one right after Pulse in 2016, and it became about sanctuary versus safety. That was the question. Um, we did one on black male subjectivity, with which Danny, his friend here, was there, and that dealt really with black community and black communion and how men interact with one another and represent. And it was right after Moonlight, so Moonlight also became part of really. We dissected that. They dissected that movie. I was very quiet as a non-male. I didn't feel I could say anything. So yes, we do send questions. Sometimes people want to send, the host might want to send some paper or quote to kind of jumpstart the conversation. But I don't keep it to that. I kind of let it be organic once they get that question.
I like Zaya and Elia have. It's so important to reach out to your peers because there's a lot that school's not going to teach you, even just how to negotiate. So when you're offered a museum show, there's so much that's not on the table when they talk to you. And just one simple subway ride with this girl right here, and I was like, okay, I am not this magnificent being next to me. Schooled me on how to basically say we're equals and decide what space I wanted to be. I had just spent brutal winter in this beautiful residency in Massachusetts in the coast, and I had to kick my way out of snow. It was during that giant snowstorm, and I said next year, no matter what happens, I'm going to be in sunlight. So I basically was able to negotiate the shipping cost of my show into them paying for a studio for me to be in Miami for the year. So you can manifest. But it was just a subway ride and a conversation with your peers. Like you have to, there are resources that you're not taught, so you can just only learn through conversation.
I think that's important to sound off. If you have a question, you have a doubt, you call your friends and even your non-friends. Not be afraid to even approach people that you might feel might be able to help you. I mean, that took a minute to do, but now I'm not afraid, even if I'm not sure of a person, but I feel that they can offer me something. I mean, I think artists, we do want to help each other because we know it is like that, like negotiating a museum exhibit. There is a lot that they're not going to tell you, and negotiating a gallery exhibit. That's another, So it's important to. I think you're right. I think it's important. People just assume it's just a curator, and it's not just a curator. It's really your peers.
I mean, I have constant anxiety, partially, I think, for that exact reason, which is that, right now I'm working on 5 solo museum shows. I just finished 2 major public art pieces. I'm going to Taiwan next week. I have a 6-year-old I'm teaching at Columbia, Parsons, and, and I want to make, and not only are these logistical issues happening, I'm negotiating contracts for all of the projects. and I'm basically managing a small business, right? And I want to make amazing art, right? So you're trying to balance all of these things and do them with excellence and grace and beauty, and it keeps you awake at night. It keeps me awake at night, at least.
You guys have a gallery, and the gallery, see, I feel like the gallery should earn that 50% and should be doing all that stuff, but they don't do it. You're the one doing it. You're the one negotiating the museums, and anyway, that's
And
another
the
combo.
thing is, they'll do part of that, but a lot of like the thing that'll sustain your studio practice, they're not going to be aware of. They think, oh, it's magic. Of course, you can do this thing that takes you 2 years and 3 weeks. So, for instance, I had to like reconsider. I have this 3 shows opening in April, and I had to say cut all public engagements for March. I was supposed to do all this stuff, and the only thing I could not do was international. So I'm going to be in Germany
Breathe.
for a week.
Breathe.
But I ended up cutting off all this other stuff that was not going to necessarily nurture what I needed to do a good job in my studio. Like cut back, say no, and say yes when but learn to have that.
I say no. I no, I seriously say no because I'm an artist that I do have a job, like a outside day job, and I won't let it go. And so, like, I won't function. I really won't function. So I've learned to say no to things. I don't know what I'm going to do next year because next the shows are, this supper club thing is traveling like to 4 places already, and then there's the book coming out. But that means cutting off social engagements in March and April. That also means saying no. Like you can't. You have to like weigh in and see. Well, can I do this? And if you can't, you can't. And let me tell you, the curator will come back to you for something else. It's okay. I've said no to even a solo. It's okay.
And if it's meant to be, they'll reschedule. They'll shuffle the
Exactly.
cards.
If they're really interested, they'll give you another time. That's why this thing is in next year.
I love it. I love it. I mean, it's just every time, I was in the studio right before I came here because I'm finishing the piece for Taiwan that I'm working on. And, I see the thing and it wasn't there, and then it's there. And then it's just this magic. It's this magical thing that happens. And I feel incredibly lucky that I have the opportunity to do this with my life. Um, there's also always things changing in the world, so right now my next project is in part inspired by the kind of ways that social media and identity algorithms have created basically identity politics silos on the internet, which are actually affecting real life. And that's it's terrifying, but it's also really exciting, to engage with these ideas and make new work that can attempt to, unpack some of this stuff, um, while also offering people these incredible experiences. So I love it. I love it. I feel lucky and blessed.
So rewarding, even at the toughest time. And you're like, oh my god, it's 5 in the morning and I have this to be delivered by 9 a.m. It's so rewarding once you see it, the process and getting it done. Like, I, yeah, yeah, it's just the reward of being able to be part of it. I think we're almost a little bit like priestesses, where
Magic.
That moment there is magic, but there is like, we can contextualize it and like you have to develop this rigor, you have to do all this stuff. But honestly, it has to come from this space. And if you don't develop yourself as a conduit, it doesn't manifest. Got too hooky here, but that's it.
So basically what I do is I do research, and I also try not to take positions. I know that's not a popular approach, and I try to track terrains, and I think it's partially because of my kind of relationship with anthropology, where I attempt to look at the world and then take that world and then create a version of it in the work that I make. And so when I say politics, I'm generally talking about the fact that there's this massive, basically before Barack Obama left office, there was this kind of silence around the massive building of bifurcation in our country, and now it's this. It's like we're back. It's back. Like it's just back. It's back at full force. It's back at full strength. It's like crazy, and real life may not be 1950, but the media, the political, and real life may be 1952. I don't know, because I live in New York City, so I get a little isolated, you know. But so that's where my interests lie right now, is trying to understand what happened. What happened? Why are we here? I thought that we were moving forward. We were going somewhere, and suddenly that I thought this collective utopian vision that the United States had, in fact, and resisted but was attempting to embrace, was on the horizon. And then suddenly it was just smashed. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And so I'm interested in making work about it.
I think, continuing with that, it's I think it is. I think it's on the horizon. Because there's just too many. The United States isn't so black and white anymore, and it's on the horizon, and it's just a resistance of breaking the established norms, and that's what we're dealing with right now. Things have to kind of implode before it can move forward. It's unfortunate. We have to experience this in order for those orders to break down. And this is now those orders saying, no, they're not breaking down. I don't want to break down. I'm not going. That's why you hear sometimes, when because I like to listen to the opposite end of things. And sometimes you'll hear that people saying there's a thing against white men saying there's a thing against white men, and yeah, maybe, but yeah, maybe, but it's not. It's just the order, the pecking order it's shifting. It's not going to be like that. I don't know if I will see it, and I don't know if our children will see it. But I have faith that my great grandchildren might experience what you're talking about, and what I've been wanting to or talking about through the summer club. I have a tendency in the last 6 years, to take trips by myself. So I went to Germany because I wanted to hike the Black Forest. That was scary, but it was important for me to do that, even though it didn't feel. There were moments it didn't feel like a sanctuary, but I think going into nature, and just like a way. Some people might call it escape, but I don't. I feel like it just recharges, and it is a sanctuary. I feel nature is that. Although we're trying to. Yes, aside from doing dinners and photographs, and I cook as well. I like making dolls, and so a lot of those personal narratives kind of get translated into those dolls and photographs that I make of them. But I don't really show them that often because everybody wants the supper club, and it's an idea too that it's not. I haven't been able to just 100% dive into it, and that's another thing. And you talked about it through Adrian. You have a lot of things that you're doing in the studio, and you they're there. You knew Firelei knows about my dolls. I think they made it to Puerto Rico. They did make it to Puerto Rico, but that's because Elena insisted and wanted nothing else. This curator really wanted to take the dolls, and I'm like, oh, I don't know about this. So, yeah, I mean, we have ideas that we just do and not necessarily pull them out, throw them out full fledged. So nature is my sanctuary.
Having room to play in the studio and feel like that's a safe space, knowing who to invite in and who to not. Like, there's also conversations that you have with friends that you wouldn't have with, or criticisms that you'll accept from friends. There's, like, if a critic in a newspaper says this ain't shit, and then you're like, that you're going through a process, that necessarily that facet that they saw might not be all of it, and that their worldview might not necessarily be in sync with what you're doing. So, creating your own personal safe space, and then having that with your friends to nurture, and then learning to open those up and when to close them.
So I have a 6-year-old and a husband who's an anthropologist, and we spend our summers in upstate New York or in Brazil. And actually, the Empathics Project came out of a summer in upstate New York. And so the Empathics have their Institute of Empathy in Greene County, New York, which is where we have our house in upstate New York. And it emerged because I was there experiencing this kind of sanctuary space, and not really pushing anything, not really, expecting anything to come out of it, but when I say things like that, it's kind of not really true, because I ended up going to the Oneida community in upstate New York, which is this old utopian community, because I was doing research. Utopian community.
It was like my middle school, I just saw the spoons, and then I realized that they were a sect of the 19th century. It was a sex cult, and they cut all these virgins up, but yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to tell a story now, but that became the inspiration for the Empathics Project. So they're this utopian community that had this entire kind of ideology, and then they produced these spoons and forks and cutlery to enter into the rest of culture and function within capitalism. And I thought that was fascinating. I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And that emerged out of a sanctuary space, right? Being in a place where I had no expectations, I had no idea what was going to emerge. But I was kind of pushing myself a little bit to do research and explore nature. I spend about 2 hours every night reading science fiction. And I'm reading Ursula Le Guin's Dispossessed again. I reread Octavia Butler recently as well, which, if you don't know who Octavia Butler is, I would highly recommend it. She's amazing. She's fantastic to read. They are producing Wild Seed. That is very exciting. It's kind of about time. But yeah, so I read a lot of sci-fi right now.
I'm doing this show coming up that's going to be basically a note to all the women in the Schomburg archive. And so some of them are authors, so I've been going through all of Maya Angelou's books, all of Toni Morrison's books, and just playing them, and then finding the connections between them. But honestly, it's mostly sci-fi, like the Overdrive.
It's mostly sci-fi.
It's mostly sci-fi.
I can say that this is kind of a cheat, because I just looked at the preview for it and you guys aren't going to be able to go to it, but it's a project that I'm going to be in Taiwan, in Tainan, and it's called Art Next Tainan, and it's kind of fascinating because when I saw the preview of the work, so much of the work looks like my work. And it was totally bizarre, because it's really fascinating, because it's got this intense colonial history, right? It's this colonial history where there were indigenous people colonized by China, and then it was colonized by China.
First place that Trump called, got into trouble with China.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the work that kind of comes out of this country looks like things that you can't really put your finger on. Like, it looks completely outside of anything. It looks human, but it may be part digital. It looks like it's related to Buddhism, but then they're indigenous religions, and it's this kind of, for me at least, it was fascinating to see this preview because I don't generally in the United States find that there's a lot of work that looks like mine. And the last time I was in Taiwan, people were talking about themselves as hybrids, which I thought was fascinating too. That because people keep changing their language as well, because as they were colonized, they had to keep shifting language. So some people speak Japanese and Chinese, and some people speak there are all these languages being spoken simultaneously, but it's generational as well. Um, so it's just this like incredibly fascinating place, and I'm planning on making work in response to it as well in my next iterations of projects.
The one I'm most excited about, there's like some things happening in like Ohio and in the South and in Europe. But I guess I should be excited about Berlin. Like I'm gonna have work in the Biennale there this summer, so woo woo. But I am while the Studio Museum is closed, they're having off-site exhibitions, kind of like what Derek Adams had in Harlem. So I'll be doing something at the Schomburg. It opens at the end of April. So come by if you're in town.
I have nothing to say. I'm sorry. Well, actually, this is going to sound cheesy, but I'm actually looking forward to the David Bowie exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum because I'm fascinated with him. That's who I grew up watching, and I'm curious to know what they're going to do. And I have there is a photograph that's a nod to some of the images of him, so it'll be interesting to see all that collection of imagery of him.
That it exists. I mean, the fact that they exist. I mean, basically every time I see one of your pictures or one of your works, I mean, whatever form it takes, or even if I don't actually get to see it physically, and I see a picture, it's just this is a terrible thing to say, but like what ends up happening is first I'm like, oh, that's so amazing. I'm like, oh, I wish I made that. Like, yeah, and it's really really exciting. I feel incredibly excited that you guys are making work in the world right now.
The nuance that in like all our work, being able to articulate our voices further with every piece that's made. So.
These are my sisters from another mister. My art sisters from another misters. I mean, that's what I really feel, because of the connection that we have in our practice. Not because I photograph them, but because the nature of their works really speak to me very loudly and clearly. So I feel connected to them that way.
Thank you.